What's up guys, hello to Footballtalk here. We've arrived at what I consider the actual off-season. The draft is in the books, there are obviously still free agents floating around out there, but largely rosters are constructed in the image of the front offices and coaching staffs. The schedule for next season supposedly is being released the same day this comes out, so not until we have any major storylines coming out of training camps, this is a window of time to reflect on what we've seen since the Kansas City Chiefs were crowned Super Bowl champions in early February. That's why over the next month, I'll be releasing 2 videos per week, alternating between NFC and AFC, moving north, east, south and west in that order, looking at every single franchise with a focus on the draft class, discussing how the players selected fit in within the rest of the team building philosophy, and touch on a few key points of the offseason. I did release an extensive recap of the entire draft, and also outline some of my favorite fits for undrafted free agents that I could see make an early impact, along with positional rankings with detailed prospect breakdowns. If you're interested in learning about some of these guys in more detail, you can do so at hellofootballtalk.com. Since I've studied all these players pretty much, I'm largely just working off a few notes that I added from my draft evaluations, particularly when it comes to numbers, but I did try to relate them to what they already had in the roster and how the pieces fit together. So I'll provide quick scouting reports, discuss the player's role in the roster, and at the end of each team, I'll kind of summarize my thoughts on the class. I'm not a big fan of draft grades, which is also the purpose of this series, but what I'll do to wrap up each video is rank how much I like what these teams did within the division, shortly recapping my general thoughts. Just one more thing here, if you enjoyed the analysis, please do me a big favor by clicking that like button and subscribing to the channel if you want to follow along with the series or just show your support. Greatly appreciate that. Let's get right into it with the NFC North, and in particular the Chicago Bears. Finally, they kicked off the draft and had 2 picks inside the top 10, but they only made 5 total, and one of those they originally weren't slated to even make. Let me quickly run through the names here. First overall, Caleb Williams, quarterback USC. 9th overall, Rome Odunze, wide receiver Washington. 3rd round, 75th overall, Kieran Amagaji, the offensive tackle out of Yale. 4th round, 122nd overall, Torrey Taylor, punt out of Iowa. And then the 5th round, 144th overall, Austin Booker, edge defender out of Kansas. Let's start with Caleb. As I said in my ultimate mock draft, because of all the discussion of who will be QB2 and generally how 2 through 6 stack up, there wasn't a whole lot of discussion around the guy destined to go number 1 for the last 2 years pretty much. This guy's arm is like a toy where you can play around with it with arm angles, release points and speeds, yet his mechanics operating within structure are very clean, still loose with it to deliver throws off platform, at times fading away, but when he can step into them, he can really rip it. Every eligible is live at all times with Caleb, whether it's operating on time, or he creates secondary plays with great field vision and understanding for how the picture will change. He maintains his composure with pressure around him, whether it requires him to spin away from guys and get out of the pocket, but he really fights to stay in there and can use subtle adjustments as well. And he's an intoxicating playmaker who makes college defenders look foolish, like the little kids out there a lot of times, with the way he can dance around, wiggle himself out of muddy pockets and great stuff. Last season, there wasn't a whole lot of playing on time, and moments where he could just take the layups for solid yardage, having to make up for poor protection and his receivers and play caller not helping him out a whole lot, and a defense that allowed 40 plus points every other week. So he'll need to learn that he can't put the games on him all the time, and try to make the impossible happen, not be as loose with the ball, and that's why his pressure to sack conversion rate plummeted last season. I think this is truly a special quarterback, who now we'll see with a serious tree of wide receivers, and I think by the time he signs his second contract, we look at him as the best guy the Bears have ever had at that position. And they paired him up with Washington wide receiver Rome Odunze, who's a super efficient route runner and smooth mover, who can elude the jam of the line or fight for contact, understands how to attack the blind spots of defenders, and whether it's snapping off stuff, or gets guys to bite on double moves, he's very deceptive in the way he sets those up. Great body control, snatches the ball above the rim, and what really stands out is his ability to track the arrival of passes at awkward angles. That's why he hauled in 75% of his contested targets last season. Now, he lacks the long speed to actually break phase down the field and get over top of the defense at loose coverage, and he's not a special yak threat in terms of breaking tackles or pulling away from pursuit, but I think he's a perfect complement to what they already have at the receiver, as someone who can line up at X and win on basically any route. Matt Harmon does a great job with his website, Reception Perception, where you look at Odunze's profile, which indicates the routes that he ran, how successful he was at them, and his is just all green. Now you can put DJ Moore at the Z, motion him around that his skills shine with the ball in his hands, without having to win his route runner first. Keenan Allen operates out of the slot to eat away at static zone looks, And Odunze can be a down the field ball winner who defenses almost can't leave isolated on the backside. This is about as good a trio as we have in the league, and I think they can all eat. Then in the third with Amagaji, really intriguing developmental left tackle who absolutely dominated the Ivy League. Great urgency out of his stance, plays with good flexion in his lower body to activate those powerful quads and drive his legs for contact in the run game. Has a corner-like wingspan of 85.5 inches to establish first meaningful contact in both phases of the game. And this guy's a dancing bear on the edge, made it look easy mirroring lateral movements, and you saw a lot of opponents pretty much quit because there was no way to get around him. Doesn't always center his blocks in the run game perfectly, while in pass pro the hands come in wide and the footwork is still pretty raw, where a lot of times he largely got by just based on his god-given athletic traits. But he does have some nasty to him, and I like him better than a lot of the toolsy small school prospects that he typically sees struggle with the transition to the pros. I would have loved to see him compete against a high level of competition during Senior Bowl week, which he was injured for, but there's a lot to like here, which is why I valued him in this area, and he doesn't have to play right away. Braxton Jones is only in the third year of his rookie deal on the left side, while a 7 the opposite end with Daniel Wright, who he drafted in the top 10 last year. So they have a full calendar year to evaluate if you want to get an extension done with Jones, just play it out, or maybe Kieran is an upgrade for 2025 already if he can develop quickly. In the fourth they get the Iowa punter Torrey Taylor, who I talked about a little bit as part of my big draft recap, because I thought this was clearly a reach, or how I'd better describe it, not a smart use of resources. This has to come with the caveat that the Bears were slated for this to be the final selection of the entire draft. So for a team I really want to buy into, to think they can get out of this draft with a developmental tackle to go along with those 2 stars at the top, and not address the defense at all, because it already played like a top 5 unit based on EP per play or the second half of last season, I think that's a faulty way of looking at this. No other punter was drafted at all, so this has nothing to do with the player himself, but rather the value of the selection. Taylor led the country in total punts and had nearly 1,000 more yards than anybody else at the position, as arguably the biggest weapon on the offense for Iowa. So you took care of the first 3 downs and want to add that guy to win the field position battles when you don't actually make it past midfield. That's cool if you want to spend a late round pick on it, but I can't get on board with doing so in the 4th round when you currently don't hold another selection. However, they did come out of the blue here to still make the pick on defense that we thought we might see 9th overall already when they selected Kansas edge Austin Booker in the 5th. And I think this is a really nice way to wrap out the draft for them, and a worthwhile investment, all things considered. But let's not forget that the Bears did send the 4th rounder next year to Buffalo for it, so this isn't a net positive, but I like the player they got here. 6'5", 245 pounds with 34-inch arms, he didn't test nearly as well as I thought he might, and he officially only started 1 career game, but is able to press off and then swipe away the hands of offensive linemen and also make plays in the run game, times up the snap and blows off the ball in explosive fashion with long strides around the arc, and then off that he throws out an array of moves, whether he's crossing up tackles, throws in Euro steps, works in different counters, and just finds ways to slit up past guys. He just doesn't execute any of them at a high enough level quite yet, with too much lateral movement and at times being guided off track. So once again, an interesting player profile I'm willing to buy into here for a team that doesn't have a defined option, brushing off the edge across from Montez Sweat, who was the key cog in the transformation into one of the top young defenses in the league for the latter half of last season. DeMarcus Walker's likely a second star at the end, and he can kick inside on passing downs. Dominic Robinson came in a similar mold as a developmental rusher who has flashed at times, while Jacob Martin is a more known commodity as someone who can win the corner with speed as a rotational option. I think Booker plays around 300 snaps this season, but could start by 2025 if they don't take another shot at the position. So all in all, not a whole lot to talk about here for the Bears. They did what basically every mock draft out there expected them, as long as room was there at 9. He and Caleb already had a very friendly relationship, and have built up some rapport and training. Amagaji provides some flexibility in the blind side, as someone with the potential to be a legit quality starter down the road, and depending on his developments, they can make the decision on Braxton Jones. I thought getting a punter in the 4th definitely wasn't an optimal usage of resources, considering this was still a 7-10 team last season, but then they trade one of the 4th runners next year to address edge defensively, and find themselves another piece of the rotation, who can win in different ways as a coaching staff helps him to master a couple of moves. I can't give them massive credit for doing what we expected them to do necessarily, but I think it fits very well with the general approach of keeping the young core together, throwing in a couple of veteran pieces in wide receiver Keenan Allen and safety Kevin Byard. I think Caleb is ready to go, and they're competing for a wildcard spot this year already. Team number 2 now, the Detroit Lions. who went first round 24th overall Terran Arnold, cornerback at Alabama, second round 61st overall Ennis Rakestraw Jr., another cornerback at Missouri, 4th round 126th overall Giovanni Manu, offensive tackle of the University of British Columbia, 4th round 132nd overall Sione Vaki, safety / running back out of Utah, and then 2 6th rounders, 189th overall Mekhi Wingo, interior defensive lineman out of LSU, and 210th overall Christian Mahogany, interior offensive lineman out of Boston College. Starting with Arnold and how they ended up making that selection, they did give up pick 73 and got back a 7th round the next year in order to move up 5 spots here, which is a pretty steep price in my opinion, especially considering it ended up in the Cowboys taking Cooper Beebe there, who could have potentially been Detroit's started left guard, but I think in terms of the play himself, this is solid value. Arnold played a lot of soft press at Bama, where he stayed low and balanced whilst having his eyes locked on receivers' hips, but his ability to plan to drive in routes from off alignment, like Capano and quarters, is equally impressive. He's springy off the line, has loose hips to turn with guys, and while he only ran a 4.51 at the combine, he had several reps of running with speedsters down the field. Plus his lateral agility and how he uses his hands to swipe away the reach of blockers, combined with not being afraid to stick his face in the fan, earned him the highest PFF run defense grade for any corner in the country last season. He does get a little slop in his back pedal and tends to open his hips prematurely at times, while his route anticipation compared to running mate Cool McKinstry on the other side is certainly lacking, and he gets a little antsy when he's playing with his back to the quarterback and the receiver has a step on him, but very much in the mold of what the Lions value from the DBs, as a physical cover guy with twitchiness and someone who puts as much into attacking upfield and hitting with his chest as a tackler. Definitely needs to clean up his footwork and is still developing as only a 1-year starter, but the bright moments on tape combined with the production that he had in this one season, with 5 picks, 12 PBUs and 6.5 tackles for loss, made Detroit comfortable moving up and getting what was considered CB2 to pair up with Carlton Davis, who they traded a 3rd round pick for while getting a 6th this and next year back from the Bucks. And the Lions doubled down a corner with Ennis Rakestraw from Missouri, further ahead than Arnold in terms of his advancement, in terms of recognizing different pacing, route stems, and tells of the guy across from him in man coverage. Does an excellent job of playing to his leverage and zone assignments, also moving into the slots for stretches, and he plays the pocket of receivers as well as any college corner you're going to find. Then he's quick to fly up the field and absolutely drill receivers, while not hesitating to take on bigger ball carriers face up either. He's simply an average athlete for the position, just short of 6 feet and lacking the speed, as he exactly ran the same time as Arnold to make up for false steps. I personally loved Rakestraw's tape, highly competitive, experienced playing inside and out, 2-face player. How early does Detroit want to get him on the field? With Davis and Arnold most likely starting at the 2 outside spots, Brian Branch as a borderline pro bowler as a nickel already last season. Without CJ Gardner-Johnson, did you want to move the 2nd-year player deep more regularly when he already played at such a high level as a rookie? You've got Kirby Joseph and the Fatu Melifonwu, who really emerged in the absence of Gardner-Johnson last season, so I think they start Branch in a slot, and then if there's an injury, he moves back and Rakestraw steps in for him, which is how they might stick ultimately. Giovanni Manu, or Manu, the British Columbia offensive tackle in the 4th round, the first of the 2 players I didn't watch in the first 5 rounds, as the 2 guys coming over from Canada. Manu made 2nd team All-Canadian each of the past 2 years at British Columbia, as a left tackle primarily, 6'7", 352 pounds, with nearly 35-inch arms, ran a sub 5'1" at this pro day. Can't really speak on a tape, which I actually got a couple of days ago but didn't get a chance to dive into, so I can't say if this is a worthwhile gamble, but 4th round definitely felt early in the moment, for someone I didn't even have on my radar and was listed as a priority free agent in the Beast by Dane Brugler as I looked at it later. What I just didn't like at all is that Detroit sent a 3rd rounder next year to the Jets for this pick. So really the investment is a 3rd round pick now, so there's a lot of expectations all of a sudden on this kid. But let's move on to Sione Vaki later in the 4th, who Detroit also gave up a 4th rounder next year basically, in return for moving up 32 spots here, but were able to still get Christian Mahogany in the 6th round anyway, despite moving down 9 slots, who I look at as a starting level guard if his medicals end up fine. We'll get to him in a second. But as for Vaki, just outside my top 10 safeties, but was actually announced as a running back here. On defense, he has outstanding lateral mobility on the backside of run concepts, but was also deployed down low setting the edge and can get around or punch through solid receivers coming from depth. Those things translate to the offensive side of the ball I'd say in some way, where they're using him in zone and he drifts underneath routes as he reads the quarterback's eyes, and he's a physical matchup player against tight ends. On offense, he averaged nearly 10 yards per touch as a running back and played slot receiver in high school. That's definitely a plus, combined with averaging a nearly 48% missed tackle forced rates per carry. Defensively, choosing appropriate initial angles and wrapping up as a tackler definitely things he needs to improve upon. And of course, he's not as well developed, executing concepts as a ball carrier, with only 29-inch arms that limit his catch radius. But I think he's a natural runner, and this selection is big in terms of special teams, because his skill set translates extremely well to the new kickoff return structure. As a one-cut-and-go guy with great tackle breaking ability, I think he also offers some intriguing skills as an RB3 behind David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. If Detroit actually looks at him as a DB, it might be a bit worrisome that if you throw him out there with the 6 names I've already mentioned as core guys in the secondary, the fastest guy of the bunch ran a 4.48. Very much in line with head coach Dan Campbell and general manager Brett Holmes, they just got themselves a great football player, and they'll see how exactly they use him, even though I'm already penciling him in for returning kicks. Then 2 more 6th rounders. The Lions actually traded up yet again here for Mekhi Wingo, just like they did for Vaki, but I love this one as they shipped picks that ended up with a potential third running back and the guard that'll be battling for make that roster for Houston, in exchange for what ended up being my number 8 interior defensive lineman, who I could see playing 300 to 400 snaps as a rookie already. Wingo offers a rapid get-off, low pedal, and the playmaking ability to disrupt the offensive backfield, but then he can also bench press SEC guards a couple of yards into the backfield and run defense. That snap anticipation and how he torpedoes off the ball also allow him to dictate terms in defined dropback settings, combined with an impressive ability to disengage his upper and lower half to squeeze past blockers as he works different moves. Capable of cross-facing interior protectors and corners his rushers very well. Being undersized for the position at 6'4", 285 pounds with 32-inch arms, Wingo will need to work overtime with the skills to deconstruct blocks in the run game. And with the missing length, when he does get stalled early in the rep as a pass rusher, he tends to stand up and just look to bat down passes rather than being able to free himself late. But man, this was a top 100 prospect for me, and I preferred him over either of the 2 LSU D tackles that got drafted ahead of him, including Mason Smith going top 50. I'm sure the Lions loved the fact that Wingo came back from injury for the Tigers last season and went out there for the bowl game, which he actually ended the final 2 drives with sacks pretty much. He's obviously not going to start or the duo of DJ Reader and Aleem McNeil, but he may be the quasi-start on passing downs when he starts off Reader, so he can be a dominant presence in the run game on fewer snaps. I think Wingo will immediately be a quality contributor rushing on the interior and pays off that 6th round pick before we even get through half of his rookie year. And finally, Christian Mahogany, the Boston College guard, another guy who went about 100 picks later than where I valued him, even though I understand that this is more connected to medical concerns. Well built at 6'3", 320 pounds with a wide chest, plenty of pop in his hands. Whether he's creating horizontal displacement on down blocks, upwards D tackles on double teams with one of his buddies, or sends edge defenders flying on kickouts, he has some dominant reps in the run game. He also has quick active feet and change of direction skills to mirror interior rushers, while being able to stonewall blitzing linebackers and being patient to sort off different pressure looks. He does play with a pretty high center of gravity, and his feet tend to overrun the target, which would lead to him slipping off blocks more regularly versus savvy NFL defenders. And then he has a tendency of overextending trying to short set rushers on the inside, leading to more quick L's than you'd like to see. If this guy is fine medically, I think he's a legit shot at least competing for a left guard spot, left behind by Jonah Jackson, or at the very least is the primary backup to Graham Glasgow and Kevin Zeitler. I talked about an undrafted free agent that they signed at center. You can check that out over on my site if you're interested, because they were lacking depth on the interior O-line, and I think Mahogany fits in well with the diverse schematic approach on the ground. So all in all, I really like what the Lions did here, considering where they were and how much better they possibly got here. Recognizing the big position of improvement at corner and investing big resources into it, I was questioning the Manu pick in the 4th, and if they couldn't at least wait a little bit, but I didn't study him to really judge this. Vaki, I'm not sure where they actually play him, but at the very least they got themselves a primary return specialist with those new kickoff rules. And then they got 2 borderline top 100 players for me in the 6th round, even though I realized some size and medical concerns respectively. Nevertheless, I think in terms of the big NFC contenders, you can make an argument for them having improved the most here outside of the Eagles probably. Love that feisty secondary they've built up now, and at a minimum they insured themselves for injuries in the trenches with those 2 late picks. Let's now move on to the Green Bay Packers, the biggest class among these teams, so I'll try to go a little quicker here. 1st round 25th overall Jordan Morgan, offensive tackle Arizona, 2 2nd rounders 45th overall Edgerrin Cooper, linebacker Texas A&M, and 58th overall Javon Bullard, safety Georgia. 3rd round 88th overall Marshawn Lloyd, running back USC, and 91st overall Tyron Hopper, linebacker Missouri. 4th round 111th overall Evan Williams, safety Oregon. 5th round 163rd overall Jacob Monk, interior offensive lineman Duke, and 169th overall Keaton Oladapo, safety Oregon State. In the 6th round 202nd overall Travis Glover, offensive tackle Georgia State, and then 2 7th rounders, 245th overall Michael Pratt, quarterback Tulane, and then 10 picks later Kalen King, cornerback out of Penn State. Starting with Morgan at the top, tremendous athleticism in the zone run game, where he attaches those 11-inch hands to stay connected with defenders deep into the play clock and move them around. Smooth kick slides and well coordinated in general as a pass protector, with consistent hand carriage just above the waist. May come in just on the 33-inch benchmark for tackles in terms of arm length, which does allow defenders to lock out against him in the run game, but is consistently first to establish meaningful contact in the pass game, and probably performed as well as anybody against the first defender of the boards in this draft in UCLA edge Leatu Latu. Just not an overpowering drive blocker for gap schemes, I would say, but very easy evaluation and clean profile. Some people got hung up on the arm length, but otherwise everything's there to play on the edge, and I think he slots in as the starting left tackle in place of David Bakhtiari right away. Then entering Cooper, the Texas A&M linebacker, you can argue that the Packers should have just stuck at 41 and picked Alabama cornerback Kool-Aid McKinstry themselves there, as they plan ahead for what that room might look like for them next year, but they pick up an extra 5th and 6th each while acquiring a player that can help them right now with an even higher ceiling than Cooper. Almost like a running back with the way he can shoot through tight creases and affect plays in the backfield, easy juice to run the pool of tight ends as a Tampa 2 dropper or just stick with them crossers, and he can be used in a variety of ways as a pressure player, whether he's straight rushing off the edge or running cross stalks with incredible closing burst. At this point, too often he allows offensive linemen to get into his frame and has to work on using his long arms to keep them at bay, and not the most instinctive zone dropper, as he gets caught mostly just covering grass too frequently instead of finding work. I think this was the highest potential player at the linebacker position. His combination of length, explosiveness, quick twitch and long speed is very intriguing, and now you pair him with another guy in Quay Walker, where they can fly around and clean up trash. I could see new defensive coordinator Jeff Hafley create more chaos up front and use those guys in that capacity, while Cooper is the one that is more often deployed as a blitzer, since Quay Walker has some really good stuff in coverage. With the other second rounder, they took Javon Bullard, the Georgia safety, who was almost a pure nickel in 2022, where he could stack and trap blockers, but last season he lined up people up more and already took excellent angles to the ball. Obviously has a lot of quality experience in man coverage against slot receivers, where he uses his hands well and has the loose hips to take charge of reps, but he was deployed in a versatile match-oriented coverage scheme for Georgia last year, where his mental capacity to decipher the action in front of him and disrupt the catch points or quickly shut down completions could really shine. Still learning the intricacies of playing a deep safety, where he ended up covering grass a lot playing the high post, and in isolated situations, he lacks that makeup burst to recover from a misstep or receivers getting him to freeze for a split second on double moves. I had him as my number 2 safety, however, and that's probably where he would have also been ranked for me as a pure nickel as well. We'll get to a couple of other safeties here with Green Bay still, but the slot is where I actually think Bullard primarily plays for them, because he's a better tackler and less open space, being able to play close to the box, and if they run more man coverage, he can match up well with those power slots and tight ends. Third round to get the USC running back Marshawn Lloyd, has the low center of gravity at 5'9", 220 pounds, to run through linebackers or slice through one half of them, leading to a missed tackle force rate of over 40% last season, but really impressive movement skills at a high weight with the quick feet and all the hips to make sudden adjustments, to be more manipulative utilizing pullers, and then I think he can be a real asset on third downs, showcasing natural hands, flashing the ability to go down the field and make people miss with the ball in his hands, along with having the size to stand in and pick up blitzing linebackers in protection. His two big issues, not always the most mature or refined decision making on gap plays at this point, and just looking to hit home runs all the time, and his elbow gets way too far off his frame, exposing the ball to defenders, which is why he fumbled 4 times last season on just 129 touches. This was my favorite back to watch, and I think he has the potential to be the best in this class if he just cleans up those ball security issues. On paper, the Packers just replaced Aaron Jones for a younger model in Josh Jacobs on a 4-year, $48 million contract, but they could already get out of it next offseason for less than $9.5 million of that cap, and that number will keep going down. So I can see a world where Lloyd becomes reliable enough to take on lead duties earlier than they might expect. Right now they may have the best running back duo in the league, and this could give an already really young offense even more flexibility next year. Love it. And then the second third rounder Tyron Hopper, the Missouri linebacker, the one selection I didn't love for them. Aggressive run defender who can dip on the blocks and create disruption, but also has the speed to run things down to the edges. His closing burst is the best thing about him defending the pass, whether he's shutting on completions in the flats or shoots through gaps as a blitzer. He just gets his eyes trapped in the backfield instead of reading the blocking and gets pulled up too far against play action. And he needs to work on squaring up and driving his legs through the target as a tackler, as he missed nearly 23% of attempts last season. So kind of the same mold as the two guys they already have now, and if he cleans up his tackling, could develop into a quality backup for them, but definitely a little early for me, especially as I think about some other linebackers who are available at that point. I think he's primarily a core special teamer for them, who can be used as a pressure play on third downs at times. Oregon safety Evan Williams at the top of the 4th round. Packers moved up 15 spots here, in exchange for a 6th rounder to get what I believe has been one of the more underrated safety prospects throughout the draft process. Who runs the alley with a purpose and hits with his chest and eyes up, accelerating his feet through contact. Excelled in a modern NFL-oriented defense, which typically was based out of two-high looks and relied on match principles, yet rotated into the deep post quite regularly as well. Love his instincts and spatial awareness as he's floating around, but that can also match routes from depth well. Lacks elite range to be a primary center field at the pro level, but also has a fairly maxed out frame with shorter arms, and that affects his tackling radius as well, as he only ran a 4.6 flat. I think this is a much better football player than what he timed at, and his positional workout was outstanding at the combine. Put on the film, this is a starting safety in the NFL who could plug in right next to Xavier McKinney for Green Bay, depending on another guy they selected, and Keaton Oladapo, the guy from across town, Oregon State. I'll jump to him here quickly. Very different build at 6'2", 215 pounds with long arms, being able to keep his frame clean and support to run for different alignments. Actually the highest rated safety by PFF in that regard. Also operated in a split safety structured defense with a variety of assignments where his ability to leverage targets and then arrive there with some thump really stood out. But he can also drop down and frustrate tight ends in man coverage, and even match slot receivers at times, showing great awareness for route stems and being started to deal with contact by guys aggressively initiating it. Just lacks the high-end range to make plays on the ball outside numbers from the deep post, and not nearly as comfortable when he actually has to pedal backwards in man assignments. And while he's a long, fundamentally sound tackler, dynamic ball carriers can get around him at times. But this was my 66th overall player, and I think is up there for the biggest steals of the entire draft. Looking at the new defensive coordinator's background in Jeff Hafley, it would make sense to suspect more single high safety structures. But now with the two Oregon guys, we might see them base things out of two high looks more. I think the two rookies battle for that second starting spot, but they both see the field quite a bit, as Oladapo might even play some dime backer for them. Really cool dude as well. He actually thanked me on Instagram for a story I made on him, and I wished him all the best. Going this late, I think he'll be very motivated. Now going back to Jacob Monk, the Duke interior lineman. Got to him late in the process, but liked his tape quite a bit. Plays with excellent sync in his hands and pad level, along with the grip strength to turn bodies in the run game and open up lanes, while becoming a bowling ball when used as a puller. Quick to fit and reposition his hands in order to gain control and pass protection, and stout enough to swallow the charge of blitzes or spiking rushers. And he had an excellent all-around combine workout, earning a relative athletic score of over 9.7. He does regularly lead with his helmets and pads in the run game, while his base follows, leading to him slipping off a bunch of blocks late. And those feet can get pretty heavy in pass pro, but active rushers are able to get around him ultimately if his hands don't fit inside. Lots to figure out with this Packers O-line still. Morgan at left tackle and Elton Jenkins next to him seem pretty set, but does Josh Myers stick at center or do they move Zach Tom over there? That'll depend on if Rasheed Walker can hold his own at right tackle, so now the door might be open for Monk to win the starting gig at the pivot, although I think it's more likely he competes with Myers and Sean Ryan at right guard. Either way, quality competition, and fans of other NFC North teams may just lose it if they found another start on the O-line on day 3. And then just quickly on the last 3 guys, Travis Culver in the 6th round out of Georgia State. Developmental tackle prospect at 6'5", 320 pounds, with 57 career starts. The flexibility and agility at those measurables is pretty impressive, whether he's securing linebackers in space or sticks with edge rushers trying to bend around the corner. Not a lot of strike in his hands as a run blocker, and his footwork as a pass protector needs plenty of work as he tries to learn how to properly frame rushers, but again worth taking just outside the top 200. The Michael Pratt, the quarterback out of Tulane, my personal QE8 in this draft, thought he had an outside chance of going late day 2, even though he's had plenty of nicks and bruises throughout his career. Has NFL arm talent and accuracy, even though he looks a little bit small when defenses are able to cave in those walls around him. Beautiful touch on a deep ball, can read the full field and manipulate coverage with his eyes at times. And he's an underrated athlete, whether he's pulling the ball in zone reads or delivers throws on the move. Confirming coverage post-snap and avoiding sacks, areas he needs to improve at. But I think Green Bay just got a legit backup quarterback for pennies here. You can read up in more depth about him, or on my site, Footballtalk.com if you like. And then finally, Kalen King, the cornerback out of Penn State. who was projected to be a first round pick a year ago, which is kind of crazy. Less invested or competitive, I thought, when you look at 2023. And he just absolutely bombed this pre-draft process, having a horrible week of practice down in Mobile for the Senior Bowl, and then ran a 4.61 at the Combine. But when you go back a year, how he was pinning receivers against the sideline in man coverage, his eyes as a zone player, how hard he worked in run support, there's definitely something there if you can relight that fire and get him to play with more confidence to use one of those final picks on. So as I said in my big draft recap, I saw a bunch of people out there give the Packers around the B in terms of draft grades, and some fans complaining about what they did here. I thought this was one of the top 3 drafts for any team in the entire league. Morgan was a couple of spots early but negligible, and then I thought every single pick they made other than Hopper late in the 3rd round came with surplus value for them. I understand that this is objective, of course, and I was personally high on a few of the names that they brought in here, but other than maybe wanting them to get a receiver at some point, I'm not really sure what's not to like here. Love the investments into the secondary, where they found themselves at least 2 new starters, same for the O-line with a solution at left tackle, and Monk probably competing for one of those 2 interior spots that are somewhat up in the air still. Lloyd, I believe, could eventually be a Pro Bowl back if he works in those 2 areas I described, and then the added extra darts to throw at the board late by trading down a couple of times. I absolutely love what general manager Brian Gutekunst and company did here. Which brings us to team 4, the Minnesota Vikings, who had a couple of picks in the 1st round, 10th overall J.J. McCarthy, quarterback Michigan, and 17th overall Dallas Turner, edge Alabama. Then didn't pick on day 2, but in the 4th round had the 8th overall, Kyrie Jackson, cornerback Oregon, 2 picks in the 6th, 177th overall, Walter Rouse, offensive tackle Oklahoma, and 203rd overall, Will Reichert, kicker Alabama, and then 2 more in the 7th round, 222nd overall, Michael Jurgens, interior offensive lineman Wake Forest, and 10 picks later, Levi Drake Rodriguez, interior defensive lineman out of Texas A&M Commerce. Starting with the quarterback at the top, definitely feels like the McCarthy hype was a bit artificially created after all, and no Sean Payton, you're not getting any credit here, since he did go 5 spots later than where he was projected to. So instead of having to give up at least picks 11 and 23, which they acquired from the Texans for a late round pick swap plus the 2 next year, all he had to give up was a late 4 and a mid 5 this year while getting back a selection just outside the top 200 in order to move up 1 spot and make sure they don't get jumped by the Broncos or Raiders who were right behind them. For McCarthy, a smooth, consistent throwing motion with a basketball-like follow-through and plenty of power behind it, pro-ready dropbacks, and has plenty of experience turning his back to the defense and play action, trusting the design of the play and attack in the middle of the field. And then he's a really good athlete who can quickly dart through a lane in front of him for crucial conversions, but also has the flexible arm as he's running towards the sideline to still hit targets on the move. I personally just never looked at him in the stratosphere because the Michigan offense really struggled to move the ball in those very few moments where they couldn't run the ball. Has a bad tendency of overstriding on his release, especially going to the left, doesn't throw outside the numbers with the right trajectory a lot of times, and kind of leads defenders towards the targets on longer developing routes. So I looked at him as more of a late 2nd rounder even personally, but I'm not going to act like I'm a perfect quarterback evaluator. And as I always said, he makes a lot of sense as a match with Cameron O'Connell as the play caller in Minnesota, and what they want to do offensively, running a bunch of play action, moving the launch point on bootlegs, attacking between the hashes in the intermediate area, what he could provide out of structure on top of it. I think Sam Darnold starts the season for them, and he could do pretty well there, but if he does have a couple of rough games, they're off the playoff picture with a few games left, or even gets hurt, McCarthy steps in and probably doesn't give up that job anymore. And then late in the 1st, Minnesota moved up yet again as they jumped 6 spots from 23rd overall in exchange for a 5th rounder and tapping into that 2025 draft capital with a 3 and a 4 respectively. In a vacuum, it's a pretty defensible trade if you consider Werner as potentially the best defensive player in this class. It's just that they only have the 1st rounder and a 5 next year currently. We'll get to that at the end here, but they've already kind of splurged with those 2025 picks. As for Turner, underrated run defender in my opinion, where he plays with good sink in his hips and locks out with those 34.5-inch arms to set a physical edge, shows no hesitation of launching himself into pulling guards or clear the lane for his teammates as the setup man on twists, and then his burst of the ball, the shoulder dip to get underneath, the reach of offensive tackles, the explosiveness to work across face on them, but especially right now still, the ability to convert that speed into power, give him a highly attractive pass rush profile. Could do a better job of creating that half-man relationship in both facets of the game, and needs to develop his hand combats and work on a more comprehensive rush plan to live up to his potential. I thought while the resources they invested here were significant, in a vacuum this is a player worthy of that type of move, Turner was long projected to be the first defensive player taken, and you get him at 17th overall. I think he's ready to contribute in the starting role right away, with the potential to turn into a double-digit sack artist, and with that scheme defensive coordinator Brian Flores likes to run, where it's kind of all or nothing in terms of sending 6 or dropping 8 into coverage, Turner looks very comfortable redirecting if he's asked to drop out, running with guys as the play is extended. He had an insane combine workout, including looking better than most legit off-ball linebackers in those transition drills. Because of those trades, including move up into the first round with the Texans weeks prior to the actual draft, Minnesota didn't make a pick on day 2, but then they started off day 3 really strong, with Kyrie Jackson at the top of the 4th round, the Oregon corner, super long feisty pressman corner, who can work in different jams or fake those to keep receivers off guard, clearly a high IQ cover guy who anticipates routes based on splits, position on the field and down in distance, while having a good understanding of how to adjust his landmarks in zone coverage. Those long limbs also happen to defend the run, being first to punch and release, along with using some swim moves at times to get by blockers. His top end speed when receivers are actually able to stack him in vertical routes is a little less than you'd like to see, and because he's nearly 6'4" with the high center of gravity, his redirection skills when asked to play off can be a bit labored. But I had a mid-day 2 grade on this guy, and I love his fit with Flores in Minnesota. When you want to send heat, his ability to disrupt the timing of routes, where he's not asked to cover more than 2.5 seconds most of the time, can really shine. You like what he brings against more straight line guys like Christian Watson of the Packers, and of course you already battled New Bears wideout Rome Odunze a few times in Washington. Whether they want to put Byron Murphy Jr. in the slot or outside, I think Jackson starts for them on the perimeter from week 1. Next up, Walter Rouse, the Oklahoma offensive tackle, a former top 500 overall recruit who began his career at Stanford and started a total of 52 games for them, and then as soon as this past season, stood out to me first during East-West Shrine Bowl practices, where he was just shutting down pretty much all of the edge rush talent he had down there, able to roll his hips into contact, and works very well in combos with his guard, has good rhythm in his kick slide along with good awareness for the depth of the pocket, and easy lateral movement skills to cut off crashing the ends. Gets caught over striding and occasionally crossing over his feet in the run game at times when he shouldn't, and makes himself vulnerable to losing inside late as his weight shifts onto the outside foot too much. But to get a backup tackle of this caliber in the 6th round, when you already have arguably the best tackle tandem in the NFL in terms of the starters, and you needed someone you can depend on behind them, that is tremendous. Which brings us to the Alabama kicker Will Reichert. I don't study specialists, as I already discussed earlier, but as an Alabama fan, I've watched this guy kick a lot, a top 3 kicker on consensus boards, and has been very reliable throughout his career. If you take out his freshman season, where he only got a few attempts, 80 of 93 on field goals, that's an 86% hit rate, and he's only missed 1 of 275 PATs since then. It was time for them to move on from Greg Joseph, and to use a pick outside the top 200 on his replacement, I believe, is much more defensible than a punt in the 4th, for example. And then the 2 guys in the 7th round, Michael Juergens, interior lineman out of Wake Forest, brother of New Eagles starting center Cam Juergens. Michael has some of the same qualities in terms of the short area agility and his mobility in the zone run game or climbing up to the 2nd level. Although he's clearly not at the same level, does a good job of keeping interior pass rushers at the end of his reach and keeps his eyes busy if he has no direct assignment. He's shown continuous improvement, moving off from center to left guard last season, but his hand placement generally needs some work. He didn't test nearly as well as I wished he could, and I first became familiar with him when I watched those Clemson D tackles absolutely steamroll him in the 2022 matchup, so he'll have to battle for a roster spot. And then a small school D tackle in Levi Drake Rodriguez, who absolutely blew up the Tropical Bowl, where he was named the game's defensive MVP after racking up 3.5 sacks. Built like a ball of butcher knives and just looks violent getting off the ball already, works in push-pulls, stabs, and just creates balance issues for blockers, regularly as a pass rusher. But only has 32.5-inch arms, and there are too many body-on-body reps in the pass game, and definitely more of a gap shooter, and someone who can disrupt plays rather than IDing blocking schemes and countering what the offense is doing. Minnesota definitely needed to add some depth on the interior D-line, and Lee represents sort of a different skill set as a high-energy player who will bring that to practice. Not sure if he's anything more than a rotational player for them as a rookie, but I think he definitely makes his roster. What's interesting about this Vikings draft is that their general manager Quesiado Fomensa has a background in analytics, and we look at him as this guy always looking to make plus value decisions. Well, they give up resources to move up one spot for the quarterback, and then significantly more than that to get Dallas Turner, to secure themselves cornerstone pieces on both sides of the ball, similar to what the Texans did up high last year. So he knows what's right based on the numbers, but actively ignored that as they trusted their gut and got guys who could really make an impact for them long term. I don't mind it necessarily, especially as it comes to Turner. Of course, how close he and McCarthy can ultimately be to those lofty expectations set by the dynamic duo in Houston will determine how people judge this pairing, but I think patience has to be applied here, since they're both not as pro-ready products, since they're both not ready-made products in that same way. I love the Jackson pick in the 4th as a starting corner, I believe, and Rouse in the 6th as a swing tackle, along with a couple of depth pieces on both sides of the trenches. They do need this class to hit though, considering how much they eat into next year's draft capital. And that actually brings us to our draft rankings, as explained in the intro, as I stack these 4 classes up against each other. Like I mentioned already, I thought the Packers are the top 3 draft in the entire league. Almost every single pick they made came at a value. I think it provides some flexibility in terms of a schematic perspective on defense this year, and as I look at the O-line as well as the running backs, also in a financial sense as they consider how they want to construct those groups. Maybe not the flashiest names for casual fans, and I've heard people complain, especially about Morgan at the top, but as I consider how I evaluate those players, how they acquired extra picks, and how they continue to hit on utility, I love what they did here. Next up the Lions, not as many surplus value selections, and a significantly smaller class with only 6 total picks, but they invested heavily into the corner position, which was the biggest area of need for them, with 2 eventual starters in my opinion from the SEC, between Terran Arnold and Ennis Rakestraw Jr., 2 interesting picks in the 4th round with the Canadian tackle Manu, who has an impressive athletic profile but unfortunately didn't have any tape on, at least until a couple of days ago actually, and Sione Vaki is somebody that can play at running back or safety and should immediately be an answer to the new kick return setups. Plus he got a couple of guys on the interior O and D lines I had about 100 spots higher in my rankings, even if there are concerns with both. The Bears didn't do anything surprising at the top, finally getting the quarterback of the future and a true franchise player in Caleb, plus getting him his new favorite target in Rome Odunze potentially. Absolutely love that pairing to go along with what they already had in place. They get a super talented project at tackling on Magaji from Yale in the 3rd, but then I've discussed the punter Torrey Taylor in the 4th quite a bit by now, how I don't think Chicago is quite at the stage yet where they can use the final draft selection on that position, although they did move back in by tapping into next year's draft picks to get Booker from Kansas as an interesting edge prospect. And then I do have the Vikings 4th, but it's not like I hate what they did here at all. I was just a lot low on McCarthy personally, and while I think they're defensible moves, I wouldn't say that this was optimal usage of resources, especially as it pertains to the pressure they put on themselves by using all of that 2025 draft capital. If the quarterback and edge rush up high hit, and they got themselves a starting corner in the 4th, with Kyrie Jackson I believe, they'll be very happy with this long term. Now it's up to Kwesi and O'Connell to make it all work. That brings us to the end of the video. These are all going to be of the long variety, so I'll keep myself short here in the outro. Thank you so much for watching, I hope you enjoyed the breakdown. Please hit the like button if you did, and become a subscriber if you aren't yet. Just 2 quick clicks for you, and if you want to share this with a fellow fan of your favorite team, rival or whatever, I'd really appreciate that too. As I mentioned during the intro, you can find all of my draft and non-NFL content at hellosforfootballtalk.com, which is down below in the description, along with my social media handles to further engage with me and stay up to date with everything I do. Hope to see you back on Friday and follow along for the rest of the series. So until then, see you later. Peace!